There's always something new from our sponsor, Text Control. They just released version 30 of their document processing library that includes new document collaboration features. Using TX Text Control, you can integrate online document editing, document signing, collaboration, and PDF processing into your ASP.NET and ASP.NET Core web applications. Whether you need to create PDF invoices, quotations, or reports, TX Text Control provides the developer libraries for all document-related tasks. Check out the new features and see their technologies in action by visiting the live demo at demos.textcontrol.com. That's demos.textcontrol.com. Hi, I'm Scott Hansel, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with Nicola Lindgren. She's a senior QA engineer and QA manager at Us2. She's the author of How Can I Test This?, coming out soon, and also another book called Starting Your Software Testing Career. Thanks for chatting with me today.
Thank you for having me.
So you are a career tester, a career QA person. How do you see the QA role and the kind of the formal software engineering role? Because in the past, I've felt a little bit like there's a pecking order there, and I wonder if that's changed in modern times.
I think it depends a bit on the company. I have seen it where software testers can be seen as inferior based on the perception that, like in those companies, of what a software tester can do, and that is find bugs after they've received a build. Maybe or maybe not, those people can write test automation. In other companies, I've seen more value tied to software testers because they know that software testers can also provide value by preventing bugs. So that in one way it depends. But then when I've spoken to some of my friends about their experiences at their companies, when you talk about pecking order, you could then talk about, say, salary bands. And at some companies, testers will be in the same salary bands as developers. In others, they'll be in a lower one. So, I mean, it's not all about the money, but then if you were to say a salary band is a way a company can show how much they value you, then that could also be a proxy for pecking order, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've been testing and in the tech industry for at least a decade. I'm curious, has automated testing always been a thing in your career time, or were you around as Selenium was picking up steam and automated tests and unit testing was starting to become popularized?
At the start of my career, I knew people who were specialized at test automation, so I knew for a fact there was already a demand for it. But when I remember like looking at some job ads after like when I was looking to leave my first company, and there was nowhere near as much demand for test automation as there is now. So it's not like I was there before, or it's not like I've been here before there was a great desire for that skill. Mm-hmm. But I mean, if you were to have a wee nosy at LinkedIn or any job site, chances are a lot of employers would like those skills from software testers.
Yeah, when I started using Selenium in like 2005 or 6, and I guess it came out in 2004, and that's when we started to think about browser automation. And then before DevOps was even a word, build servers, we just called them build servers, continuous integration servers, I think around 2001. But I still hear about companies that are manually accepting builds from the devs and then sending a QA person to manually click their way through it, even now in 2022. Has that been your experience as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'll push back at you a little bit on this. I think you need to manually test a new build because you can't. If you're looking at the new features, because you need to actually have written code to check to dictate what should happen. So you can't do that against something that's completely new or have that already. But then I understand having tests ready, like regression test scripts ready for to check that the behavior is as it was before. So I don't think you should try to replace all testing with test automation. But if you want to save time and not check again and again for as you add new features, okay, does this still work? Does this still work? Does this still work? Then I definitely think test automation adds value there.
Yeah. I've always said if you do something twice, you should probably write some automation around it
Yeah,
if you catch
yeah,
yourself doing that.
yeah. So that's one part of the story, but then another is change can be hard. So you're saying how some companies still have manual testers. But then if that's how they've always done it and they feel, one, if they feel like it's working for them, and two, they've never known otherwise. Like if you're at a company for a long time and let's say these people don't go to meetups or conferences, they don't have an awareness of how others in the industry do it, then they may think that it's normal and it's fine to do this regression test suite that takes a week manually every time. So for me, it's not like, I mean, I disagree with their approach, but I can understand why others do things differently based on their experience and what they have been exposed to.
Yeah, that's a very healthy and inclusive, attitude. But I think that it's like if someone has always, planted their garden this way, but then science and the industry has moved in another way that says if you plant your garden that way, you're going to have this much more yield. It's kind of beholden to us to let them know, though, don't you think?
Mm,
I mean, you're writing these books to get the word out about
yeah.
possibly a better way, and I hope that those folks that are manually testing would read your books. I would
I
think.
hope so. I definitely hope so. And especially people like new in their career, it's hard to get to those people. I mean, if they're not looking for information, like sometimes I feel things like Twitter can be a bit of a echo chamber. Like you'll have like similar opinions. So then sometimes when I try to like share my ideas, I thought, oh, I'm basically preaching to the choir. And then with LinkedIn, it's a bit of this environment where you're like, look how successful I am in my career. Like people aren't running around.
Yeah.
I mean, you do, like lately, I think I've seen some people share their experience of being laid off or failures, but it's this like warped, edited version of reality.
Well, LinkedIn is business Instagram, right? Here's me getting on a private jet, or here's me doing this thing.
Yeah, and then now it's like all about the selfies. I don't get the selfies on LinkedIn. I don't get it, but I'm just a weird person. So yeah.
So you've put out a number of books. You're in the middle of working on How Would I Test This? Which How Can I Test This is coming out when?
Goal is May too.
Okay, cool. So by the time folks are listening to this, within a couple of days either direction, you'll be able to pick that up, and we'll put links in the show notes to Nicola's Lean Pub. So you're not doing that for the money, I assume. Like, do ebooks? Are you making a ton of money on ebooks? Is that your primary goal? Is to get rich on ebooks?
Of course, that would be nice. But no, I would have to charge a lot more money if I was to think about how much time has gone into the books. If I was like for the first, maybe not even $1 an hour. I don't know, but
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I did a book on ASP.NET a number of years ago. It was about 1,000 pages, and we figured out it was about $3 an hour.
yeah. Initially, the first one, starting a software testing career, started as a series of blog posts.
Hmm.
Or actually, first it just started as notes on my phone, and then it became like a blog posts expansion thing on Google Docs, and then eventually I realized it should be a book. So it was never really the plan. And then, how can I test this? Was like, again, it was an idea, and then I tweeted saying, "Oh, like, well, this am I the only person who loves examples?" Because it's focused on, instead of having a bunch of theory and then a little bit of example, I wanted to turn it around and focus on how you would apply theory to the examples. I came across, I'm going to butcher his name, the author of Spec by Example.
So you're referring to Specification by Example, How Successful Teams Deliver the Right Software, a very well thought of book. I think the gentleman's name is Gojko Adzik.
Yes, him. And I was fortunate enough to have discovered his book within the first 6 months of my career, or maybe first year. And I find using examples makes things a lot more real, or it makes things makes information a lot easier to digest. So that was my hope in writing a book that used examples or had examples at the forefront.
That's super important, especially for early in career people to get started, is because everything is very abstract, and using examples really kind of grounds it in reality. So in your new book, How Can I Test This? You're collaborating with other authors, different authors per chapter, with real examples. Like, here's an API. Let's talk about it. Let's talk
Yeah.
about its design. Here's a
Yeah.
website. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. And I was, I've learned a lot from my co-authors. I really enjoyed reading through their chapters and seeing how they'll approach problems. Because I don't know, like, and also especially getting the feedback, because sometimes you have this idea of how much you know. And this is like humbling in a way. I thought I was okay at testing APIs, right? I honestly did. And then I got feedback on my API chapter, and they're like, what about this? What about this? You didn't think about this. But that was because based on my experiences and based on the people I had worked with and the feedback I got previously, I had that understanding that I was pretty good at testing APIs. But then after receiving all this feedback from people who have spent a lot more time testing APIs, and probably also have been surrounded themselves by stronger, smarter people, they were able to pass that knowledge on to me. So, it sounds weird to like say that out loud, but I didn't seek to write the book to learn, so to speak. The idea was to share knowledge, but creating the book has taught me a lot, and that's pretty cool.
I have never learned so much as when I have taught a class on a subject.
Like from the question and answers, or?
No, from the making sure that I didn't embarrass myself in front of the class. I'm brought in to teach a class on, here's expert Scott to talk about whatever, C#. And then I go into it with I'm going to spread the word and I'm going to help folks. But then I like start digging and finding edge cases, and then I get feedback from them. And at the end of it, they learn something, but I am far, far better at the topic having gone through the process.
Also, if you're going to teach something, you need to know how to explain it well. And sometimes you think you understand something, but then you're like, okay, but I need to explain this concept to these, like, for example, absolute beginners.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really break it down, you can be confronted by the reality of having a shallow understanding.
Well, and you actually have a blog post on your Medium called 3 Things I've Learned from Writing an Ebook. And you point out that you really don't want to underestimate the value of feedback from a diverse group of people. It seems like you got kind of hit with a lot of feedback right off the bat, and you started to think about your experience versus theirs.
Yes. Yeah, I was intentional. So for the first book, I was intentional about seeking reviewers who I felt were different to me, both in terms of like where they're based and what industries they've worked in. Because I talked to you about the whole echo chamber thing. I didn't want a bunch of reviewers who would just be like, "Oh, that's good, that's good. Oh, you got a spelling mistake there." There were 6 reviewers. 4 of them reviewed the whole book. 2 of them reviewed a few chapters, and there was such a small percentage of the feedback was repeated. It was like these different perspectives that were thrown at me. And the same thing here. We have 2 reviewers for How Can I Test This? And I specifically asked these 2 people to be reviewers because I thought they would be able to look at things in a way that would not just that they would add value, but I thought that they would be very different to how I would see things. And that's what I wanted.
At the end of the day, your customer has to be at the center of everything you do. This starts with the right customer data strategy, as well as the right foundation to solve the challenges that typically inhibit the success of your company, such as data quality, data governance, and connectivity. mParticle is your real-time customer data infrastructure that helps you accelerate your data strategy by cleansing, visualizing, and integrating your customer data from anywhere to anywhere. Ultimately, better data leads to better decisions, better customer experiences, and better outcomes. See why the best brands choose mParticle. Go to mparticle.com. That's mparticle.com. So when we say diversity in this context, I mean there's all a pie chart of diversity in gender and age and background, but there's also, from the context of QA and software, I'm also guessing language, where you grew up, whether you're on mobile or not, how you think about software. What are some examples of the diversity that you saw in the ways that people approach testing?
That's a really good question.
Thank you. I love it when people say that, by the way. That's the best part of doing a podcast, is that someone will be like, "Oh, that's a great question." I'm like, "Yes."
Aside from what you already stated, this doesn't apply specifically to the book regarding diversity of thought in testing, but a different approach to testing is relying solely on test cases and predefined test cases. That is not a viewpoint that I seeked for this book, admittedly. But I know people who think you can only test by writing test cases. The second viewpoint, which in terms of diversity of thought would be only testing against requirements. And this book deliberately goes against that. A lot of testers believe, and notice I'm speaking the third person and not including myself in this group, the goal of testing is to make sure that all the requirements are met. And that, I think that is part of it. I don't think that's all of it. The reason being is there are implicit requirements. So even on the most documented projects of like, I don't know, all these like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 requirements or user stories in Jira or whatever, there's always these implicit requirements that aren't communicated but are still expected. And you need to find a way to deliver those. And by you, I mean both testers to test against it, but also developers to build these. So in the book, the chapter 1 is the classic login. Let's say you've used the stories for a login feature. You'll probably have some sort of rules around password validation, characters. Maybe you'll have an allow list for characters that are permitted to be entered into the UI. But then things like the fact that your password will not show as plain text as you enter it. It will show as asterisks or dots. Probably you won't, or the fact that the information will be encrypted. The email address and the login field should be consistent. Like the sort of validation should be consistent against other email fields that you have in your program or software. A lot of these don't tend to be communicated, but people will still expect that.
Right.
So the book focuses a lot on those sorts of reading between the lines scenarios as well.
Yeah. Sometimes at Microsoft, we call those the principle of least surprise, right? If something happens and the user is surprised, like, oh, that's weird. That's probably some implicit requirement or expectation on the behalf of the user. And everything should be as non-surprising as possible. If you're trying to do something cute or fancy or tricky on the login page, it's going to make the user both confused and surprised, which brings me to my next question, which is, it seems like a QA person needs to be talking to the UX folks, the designers, the business user, the devs. It's really one of those you need to talk to everybody type jobs.
Yeah. And I think it helps to have like an okay or some sort of understanding of the different roles. Like I found as a tester having not just like the test, being able to write test automation, but being able to read code. And like, let's say you receive a pull request to test something new, look at it and be like, what is this doing? Like, what's the change? What could be affected? And then say with UX, having an understanding of what a good user experience looks like. A resource I have found very useful, Jacob Nielsen's usability heuristics.
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah,
turn to. You've come across that as well?
yeah. I think it's Jakob Nielsen.
Jacob Nielsen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I came across that at a conference and I was like, oh my God, this is so nice. This is so good. I try to look elsewhere for inspiration. And also in terms of getting empathy for seeing how my team members, like what they care about. Like, I mean, I care about software quality. I care about providing information about the system, but then seeing, okay, all of my colleagues, what do they care about and how do my actions affect them?
Where do you see the role of testing as a practice going through the organization in the context of unit tests? Like, are you writing unit tests, or are you just encouraging the devs to write unit tests that then get run during the build? Then your Selenium or your Playwright, let's click on a button in an automated fashion tests. And then like actual production tests. Do you ever run your automated Selenium or Playwright tests in production to go and test that? Or are you always doing it in staging? I'm curious, maybe starting at unit testing.
Unit testing, I encourage developers to do it. In the past, from what I've seen, they don't always get done. From my understanding, it's when you have like this push for like feature, and you're trying to push features out, practices like that can get sacrificed.
Usually first, unless it's test-driven development, it's usually the first thing to go out the door is unit tests.
Admittedly, I've never worked in an environment that was test-driven development. No, I haven't. It's I've read about it. I've read about the theory, but no, I haven't experienced it.
Usually, it's the theory at the beginning of the project. It works out great, but it takes serious discipline. It's like working out every day. You know what I mean? Like it's easy to work out hard for a week, and then it's 3 times a week, and then it's twice a week, and then you work out occasionally. And test-driven development's a lot like that.
Okay. And then with test automation, try to automate what we believe is like needs to be automated. So obviously, like common use and like common scenarios, endpoints that get called often. We like to, like where possible, you get into a CI/CD. I have never personally run tests against production, like some sort of monitoring. I have taken steps to set that up, but we had never gotten to the point where we were ready to. You'd have to have some things be ignored, because you'd actually be in prod, and we couldn't really get that prep done. And ultimately, there were other things that had to be done as well. So we felt not that there was no value in that, but the other things that also had to be done at the time always was more important than setting things up in prod.
Yeah, I'm trying to get a sense because I'm a one-man shop, a one-person shop, and I've got my blog and my podcast, and I've got my homepage, my brochureware site, and like you, I've got a number of little mini sites and things like that. And while I have some unit tests, maybe a couple dozen, and I have some Selenium tests that I'm currently moving into Playwright, I don't have anything that runs against prod other than like Pingdom, which is the website up? And this morning I got a note that the website was down. But it was just down because I have a health check website. I have like hanselman.com/health check. And it literally just returns a string that says healthy. And if it doesn't return the word healthy, then something's wrong. But that's a major error. That doesn't actually tell me that anything's wrong. That tells me that the car has completely crashed and gone completely off the road and it's sitting in a ditch. But I was wondering if I should be running my unit tests in production, once a day, to go and just assert all of my assumptions. And I was curious if that was something that people were doing, or if that's just something that people think about and never do.
I'm sorry, I can't answer your question. I mean, regarding having some sort of like basic, like "hello, are you there" sort of thing, I've been on projects which would have greatly benefited from that, where just like a basic call to see if things were up would have shown that there was a problem.
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah.
But then again, it's like the reason why I haven't been a part of a project where it would have benefited from that is there was always something else that had to be done instead, or that we got more value from at the time.
Yeah.
And I mean, for selfish reasons, I'd love to learn more about monitoring and seeing how things are, and learn from someone more experienced than me in that area who's done that a lot in the past. But yeah, just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Actually, so I just made these couple of websites. Like if you go to my website and just go /health check, it returns the word healthy. That was an example that says the site's up, it's serving pages, and I actually return the string with C#, so I know that it compiled, right? And if any error comes back other than an HTTP 200, then I know that I'm in a mistake. But then Mark Downey, who's a friend of mine from work, who works on my blog with me, he added a bunch of other health checks that happen when you call /health check. He checks the database connection. Can I read the database? Can I write to the database? Is my file system's permission? So it's really an assertion of system health, which gets into, like you said, large system monitoring and things like that. And I'm trying to figure out in my head where that goes, because monitorability seems like a part of testing, but it's not directly in the QA, job description.
as I said, I haven't got experience in it, unfortunately. But the teams that I've seen, so when I've been on larger projects and I've seen other teams do it, it seems to be more like a DevOps thing, or
Yeah.
developers owning it.
Hmm.
But then, admittedly, those teams had testers who didn't really have coding skills or get involved in that aspect. So if the testers, actually, yeah, because I do know some testers who've gotten involved with monitoring who have the skills to help out there.
The reason I bring it up is not to put you on the spot, but rather that, like in your book, How Can I Test This? Like chapter 3, you talk about, APIs and testing APIs. And I'm trying to think, like, the tests are basically there that could then be applied. Like the work has been done, but you're right.
Yeah.
It does need to be incorporated into the DevOps pipeline.
Yeah.
And then DevOps is always, I built it and I deployed it. Now we need to go and do those tests in production. And that would be another part of the loop, the software loop.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. I mean, at that point, since you've done all the work, you could get more value from running in a different environment or an additional environment.
Yeah. So in your new book, you talk about REST APIs. You talk about mobile applications. I don't even know how mobile testing works. Like, how would you run a test on an iPhone? I've never seen actually. I have to admit, complete ignorance. My familiarity is with testing web apps with tools like Selenium or Playwright. How do you test on a mobile app?
So, okay, most of my experiences on web apps as well, the authors of the mobile apps are a lot better at that than me. What I do know, there are special frameworks specifically for mobile testing. So our book doesn't really go into test automation, but if we were to look at test automation, you'd have, I think, Detox for like React Native apps, so ones that can be on both iPhone and Android, and then you have native frameworks for iOS and for Android. In terms of manually testing for the mobile, one problem that you have on mobile that you don't have on web is like seeing like the network, for example. Like you got dev tools, right? But then you have tools like Charles Proxy, which I've blogged about, which can help you see the network traffic. And then there are like considerations of mobile testing that you don't have to think about with desktop. So switching networks. So when you go from Wi-Fi to 4G, or when network drops, will information get saved? Like at what point are you making calls to the API? Because sometimes when you're, say, filling in a form on your mobile, things are like saved locally. So I've been working on apps where there's no calls made to the API until the very end when you submit something. And then other times it'll send calls, or you'll make calls on each page. So it's like, I guess there's all these additional factors you need to consider with mobile. Have I answered your question? I guess you realize I've been rambling.
No, that did answer my question. So a couple things that I picked up there. So first, if you're doing React Native, then Detox, DETOX, it's a JavaScript mobile testing framework, so that the mobile app runs and then executes the test on app launch, which is really cool. So then that's a way to do JavaScript React Native ones. And then that Charles web debugging proxy is a great example, charlesproxy.com, which I didn't even realize. You're right. I have a situation where I'm usually on a mobile call, like a Teams call or a Zoom call, as I'm leaving my house. And as I get down to the end of the street, it hops from my Wi-Fi onto my cellular, and there's this little hiccup, and then the mobile app recovers and gets back on the call. Somebody had to test that. And I wonder, they probably weren't just driving back and forth down the street from their house. They were using something like a web proxy to simulate unreliable networks, simulate bandwidth. And that's where Charles comes in, which is a super helpful tool.
Yeah, like seeing that. I mean, for me, the biggest benefit with Charles isn't mobile specific. It's being able to edit responses as they come in. Okay, let's say you call an API for an e-commerce page and you've done a search, or you've to return all of the ladies' jeans in a certain size that are in stock. What you could do with a tool like Charles is you could add additional results, or you could edit results. So you have a bit more power over things.
So you're forcing a bug to happen? Like
Well,
you're
you can no,
saying,
but you know what? You say that. That's actually a good thing. That, or
hmm,
not a bug, but an error. Sorry,
oh, I
bad choice
see.
of words.
Good.
An
No,
error.
that's my bad.
So, like, you want to see how your front end renders a 500, and it can be hard to manually trigger errors. With a tool like Charles, you can do that. You can see how the front end will cope. So you could speak to your backend developer and go, okay, what errors are we supposed to support? Like what? And they'll go, oh yeah, I'll return these to the front end. And then you go, okay, well then you just edit the response and the HTTP status code and see how the front end deals. And at least the front end developers, or some of the ones I've worked with, have really appreciated having that option.
So there is a ton of information in the new book, How Can I Test This? You've got, as I said, a number of different authors, a number of different chapters, lots of diversity of thought in that book. And then you've got your existing book that's already out right now, which is up on LeanPub, about how you can get involved and start your software testing career. We'll put links to both of those in the show notes. And folks can chat with you on Twitter, I assume, as well.
Yes.
Fantastic. I've been chatting with QA tester and manager Nicola Lindgren. This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.